Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Silver Tempest, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we are going to be looking at the newly revealed cards from Scarlet and Violet, giving my first impressions on them. This is, of course, the introductory set, bringing back EX Pokemon and also giving us the Terrastal EX mechanic, where there are two of them. We have Arcanine and Gyarados so far. They both share the same Terrastal little rule box. I'm really hoping that this will be something where they give us maybe a different rule box each time with Terrastal EX mechanic, because otherwise they've really gone safe with what could be a really interesting mechanic. But nonetheless, a ton of new cards to look at. We're going to jump down actually to the trainer cards to kick things off. And of course, there's a Scarlet set and a Violet set in Japan, so we're going to have to do two loads of trainers before we get into the new Pokemon. We'll start off with the reprint of Palpad, definitely a big card for the game. Happy to see it coming back. It could be a big card for Control to still be viable in the game, because then we still have our Silene loop going on, so definitely important in that regard, but also has found its way into other decks throughout its tenure. We have Nestball, definitely a big card for the search of this game, essentially. We are losing Quick Ball to rotation when Scarlet and Violet will be part of our sets. Let's not forget that rotation also comes into effect. So Nest Ball is a decent pseudo replacement. I think people are going to be surprised at how much worse Nest Ball is to Quick Ball. But that's not to say this isn't still a very reasonable card in our decks. So that's just going to be a staple in a lot of things alongside Ultra. To give us plenty of discard synergy still within our decks, and give us search for more than just basic Pokemon, of course, and we even have VIP Pass as well, so there'll be a bit of a power struggle between the speed of getting two out with a VIP in the opening stages versus the consistency of a Nest Ball throughout the entire game. So an interesting deck building decision and discussion for players with different decks. We have the Rock Chest Plate, which we've already seen. Fighting Pokemon take 30 less damage from attacks from your opponent's Pokemon. Pretty important. Fighting is one of the sort of cards that, or types that get some of the most support this set, with of course the Koraidon in this set. So yeah, the chest plate bulking up those fighting types is pretty handy. We have an EXP share reprint, always a good thing to see. And we have a Defiant Band. This is almost a reprint of a Solid Rage back from the EX era, and we do know that Scarlet and Violet, upon their release at the World Championships, there was definitely a nod towards comeback mechanic-style cards. This is certainly one of the ones that I have on my radar as a card that they've specifically designed for comebacks, because this is a tool that you attach, and if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponents, you get to deal 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. So doesn't sound like a big deal. Obviously, we have choice in the format, but that's only for V Pokemon. So having the Defiant Band will allow us to actually hit EXs for the additional 30 damage, which is really important, and single prize Pokemon if really need be. But it's only if you're behind. So this is probably not going to be that card that you see 3-4 copies of. It's probably going to be that card that you see 1-2 copies of at most in decks, because it does have that situational nature. And of course we have a new supporter card that we'll get onto in a moment, Arven, that can cherry pick tool cards. So Arven becoming like a Leon style card on certain turns seems pretty valuable. So I like this card as an option in the game. We have Jack, who allows you to search your deck for 2 evolution cards, reveal them, put them into your hand. Now we are losing Evo Incense, but I still think this is way too slow. To be honest with you, I think we'll just stick with other searching options, the Bull Search style stuff, and our Dig supporters. We have a Team Star Grunt, which puts an energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon on top of their deck. So definitely trying to anti-tempo the opponent, slow them down, make it so they can't attack. It really depends on what sort of attackers are in the format. We've still got so many V and V-star Pokemon that attack for 2 energy and whatnot, and we have a ton of acceleration from Mirage Gate and other things that are still probably a thing post-rotation. So I don't really see this Star Grunt being all that strong, but it's a piece of the puzzle, right? You always see a card like this being a possible one-of in a deck that can then cycle this over and over again almost every turn with different loops going on. So we, of course, have research reprints. There's the Professor Sada version. We have Penny. Again, this is one we've already seen. Return one of your basic Pokemon in play and all cards attached to your hand. Very, very strong effect. If we can have some tanking basics, this could be absolutely massive. So, yeah, definitely a decent card there. You can also remove like lower hit point basics from play to like possibly reuse them. There's like a Lucha from this set that is like almost our replacement for Galarian Zigzagoon. There's reuse of other draw-based abilities and such that we could try and go for with this Penny. So kind of like that pseudo switch effect, but very similar to an Acerola really, but exclusively for basic Pokemon. We have Beach Court, a really strong stadium, reducing the retreat cost of basic Pokemon by a colorless. Actually really huge. I think this could enable us to play all sorts of like helpful starting Pokemon. Definitely things that are like levelable, searchable in evolution decks. I'm looking at things like Hisuian Basculin and alike, so that you can just get into those Pokemon and even commit your energy attachment elsewhere. Can be absolutely massive. So I actually think this Beach Court is going to be huge. It's also one of the main replacements that Lost Box can have to still have a huge amount of switching options, even without a Scoop Up Net and Air Balloon. So I think this is also really important if any Lost Box decks are going to continue to be relevant. So I think the Stadium will see a ton of play. As we now jump down and have a quick breeze through some cards without reading them before we have a look at the remaining trainer cards, because I do always think these are some of the most important and universal things to look at as we discuss everything else. But we have the Electricity Generator. Look at the top 5 cards of your deck, choose up to 2 Lightning Energy and attach them to your benched Lightning Pokemon in any way that you like, then shuffle the remaining cards into your deck. This card is pretty gross, right? This card's pretty disgusting. Definitely because we can use this card as basically a worse Max Elixir, because you're seeing less cards in the opening stages of the game, knowing that just 1 can be incredible if it hits, and 2 is absolutely mind-boggling if it ever comes off. Think about when you Intrepid Sorted and got 2 off of Zacian. It was crazy value for you, and that can happen. You can have those power spikes of getting 1 generator plus a turn attachment, and suddenly you're ready to go with your Miraidon or whatever else. So this can have the huge power spike of getting the 2 in the opening stages of the game, but you can also manipulate this in the later stages of the game to be pretty consistent at getting you 2, because you can use things like Energy Recycler when your deck only has like 10 cards in, then you can play the generator and have a really good chance of hitting 2. So yeah, this card is really, really good for Lightning. It seems like Fighting and Lightning are the 2 big cards getting a lot of support, and possibly Psychic as well from this set. So the generator is going to be a piece of that puzzle. Really, really strong for definitely some Miraidon base builds where it's going to be that Pokemon that gets you set up in the opening stages, but can also be that Pokemon that gives you tempo turn 2 by just coming in, swinging and attacking. Pulling these out of the deck is also really important because it's likely that your backup acceleration for the remainder of the game is going to be like Flaffy, most likely, because that's not just a lucky dip. That's going to give you consistent energy attachments throughout the like mid game. So I think Electricity Generator is massive for what is likely going to be a Miraidon Amphoros deck, is what I can tell so far from this format. We have the Ultra Ball reprint, which is nice. We have a Picnic Basket, which heals 30 from all Pokemon. Not all that strong. It can maybe nullify some spread style strategies, but other than that, you don't want to be healing your opponent's stuff. We have the Rare Candy reprint, the Rocky Helmet reprint. We have a new supporter in Katie. You use this supporter, and it's the last action of your turn. This ends your turn, but it shuffles your hand into your deck and draws 8 cards. It reminds me of like a Blues Tactics. I think this card is really bad. It's way too slow to end your turn on an effect to shuffle and draw 8. There's plenty of other ways we can try and end our turn for better like hand advantage from like abilities and such. We have the Arven supporter that I alluded to earlier when talking about the new damage mod. You get to search your deck for an item and a tool card, reveal them, put them into your hand. This card is deceptively really, really strong. I think this is going to be a very, very good card in our game. We have a few Seal Stones that we'll definitely be looking to use in non-V-Star decks, and I think there's going to be a lot of non-V-Star decks. I think there's going to be some EX-based builds which have 1 or 2 V Pokemon inserted into them, and Arven can get you access to that Forest Seal Stone that can then get any card. So it reminds me of how Irida could get an item and a water Pokemon, but the water Pokemon translated to a Drizzile or an Inteleon that could then get you all sorts of other things, right? I think that Arven is going to be similar, where it gets you that item card, which is likely going to be like a VIP pass or a ball search card in the opening stages, but then can also get you that tool, which could be a Seal Stone into, you know, a DTE or some other card like that that is difficult to access otherwise. And then it has that sort of mid-game option of allowing you to get the comeback tool card or this, that, and the other. So I think this card, thanks to the Seal Stones, has a lot of potential. And let's not sleep on how good items are just in general when we're playing a Stage 2 format, because this can get you just rare candy. And it can get you a piece of the puzzle, right? If you've got the Stage 2 in hand, it can get you the candy. If you've got the candy in hand, it can get you the ball search card to get your Stage 2. So do not sleep on like Skylar style effects in a Stage 2 format. They're way, way better. So Arven is going to be a really strong card, I think. We have Mimosa, which is a really interesting card. It allows you to choose up to 5 Pokemon from your discard pile, reveal them, and shuffle them into your deck. Then you get to draw 3 cards. Wow, this is a big, big upgrade on some old Pokemon recovery style effects. Obviously, you can't get energy back, which is a little bit awkward, but 5 Pokemon is a decent chunk to recover. And of course, it's an up to effect as well. So if you only want to get back 1 key piece that you're recycling, like a basic that you can power up or whatever, you can do that. But also you draw 3 in the process. Now, our Pokemon recovery is Rescue Carrier, Clara, and now this Mimosa. So I think this actually has a really good chance of seeing play. I really like that they've stapled a draw 3 onto an effect like this, because typically spending your supporter for just recovering Pokemon and energy and whatnot is so slow. So having a draw 3 stapled onto it gives you the chance of even drawing back into that card immediately. Low odds, but it can happen to you, is really cool. I think this card has a lot of power. Yeah, gives you a draw 3 and makes that draw 3 again just added cream on top, really. So it's not just this card that's dead in hand until you need to recycle exactly 5 things. It can be that sort of panic, oh, I guess I'll put 1 thing back in my deck just to draw 3 cards because I've got nothing else going on in my hand. So I really do like this option for giving us recycle in a different way to just having Rod every single format. So it's going to be a cool thing to try and figure out how you want to piece together your recovery in this format. We have Mesozoa City. It allows you, it allows both players, it's a stadium of course, each turn to flip a coin. If heads, they search their deck for a Pokemon, reveal it, and put it into their hand. So by playing this card, you get the first activation, in theory, but this is essentially a Pokeball in a stadium, right? But it just sits in play, ideally. And because it does give your opponent some added benefit, there could be a reason for them to want to keep this in play. It feels too wholesome, it feels too good to be true, really, because you're both flipping coins. It reminds me of Pokemon Contest Hall. That was a reasonable card, but part of that was because it could get the tools directly out of deck. This isn't just limited to basics, though. This is any Pokemon, so the fact that possibly you could use it, have a chance to hit a basic, then your opponent has their chance to hit their basic. If you went first, it doesn't really matter, because if you then have the chance to get a stage 1 or 2 Pokemon, the tempo you could get from this card could be insane if you just flip well in the opening turns. I don't think this is good enough to be a card in your deck, but definitely an interesting one that was worth looking at. Then we have some... how far down have I gone? Have I gone too far? Did I start with the electric generator stuff? Yeah, I've got to go upwards to start looking at some Pokemon. Alright, so that's all of our trainer cards. Now let's have a look at the new Pokemon revealed, of which there were plenty. We'll start off with... I'm going to go through all sorts of things, so I'm going to look at GLC and Cube and all this other stuff. Cacnea. This is actually a decent Cube card, because there are some interesting cat turns in there where it can take a hit and dish out some damage counters. Same thing for the Cacturn, maybe a little bit too boring for a Cube style card. As we scroll through, we have an Arboliva, as I'm learning these names. I have played the games, but obviously trying to say them out loud is something I've not really done too much. This is a stage 2 grass type with 150 hit points, and it has the Fill Oil ability. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve your Pokemon during your turn, you may heal all damage from one of your Pokemon. Very powerful effect, of course. It's similar to old Dragonites that we've had in the past. I remember that Dragonite being played with like Primal Groudon and such. So really not a bad effect. I think it's this and Quad Stone, which are some of the most powerful healing options that we have. And you really have to respect something that can heal damage, because of course we have things like Mewtwo still in the formats where you could fully heal and then just start swinging for the 300 or whatnot. So not a terrible effect. It is a stage 2, of course, but that hasn't stopped us in the past of just having thin 101 lines of this style effect and just having a huge heal. It could be massive for Gardevoir EX base decks if you just want to chuck like a ton of energy onto one thing and then just have this full heal option. Could be interesting for even Shadow Rider could do something like this because you draw enough cards with your Underworld Doors and whatnot, you could get towards a combo where Arboliva does things for you. So yeah, actually a pretty reasonable effect on a stage 2. It's a bit of effort, but it could find its niches, to be honest with you. We have some Charcadets and an Armor Rouge. It's a stage 1 fire type with 130 hit points, and it has the Fire Alarm ability, which I really hope it translates over to English in the same way. As often as you like during your turn, you may move a fire energy attached to one of your benched Pokemon to your active Pokemon. So it's like a washout from good old Quagsire back in the day. This time for fire types. We do, of course, have Magma Basin as some fire acceleration still in the format. And this works really nicely with Armor Rouge as a combination, right? Because you may not want to proactively damage your attacker, so using a Basin onto something else, then fire alarming it into the active position can be really important. This could be a combination card that goes alongside the new Arcanine that we'll look at in a moment. So yeah, a reasonable card. We're starting to see some fire support slowly creep back into the game. I think there's not a lot right now. Post-rotation, we lose plenty. So I think it's like this and the Stadium are pretty much exactly all we have. And the Rapidash, those are like the fire support cards that we have in the game. But this is a very solid stage 1. Don't sleep on this. We've seen Washout be very efficient in the past. It allows you to like move between Pokemon if you are tanking and, you know, retain energy and burst attackers onto the scene all in one go. So this is a really, really solid stage 1, I would say. We have the Terrastal Gyarados EX. It is evolving from a 30 hit point Magikarp, which is a little bit scary. But bear in mind, we are losing Scoop Up Net, so Zig Net doesn't really punish you as much as you used to get punished. So it would only really be like sniping style attacks that would really cause headache for you. But the Gyarados EX has 300 hit points, which is pretty big, if you ask me. Has a full retreat cost, it is weak to lightning, which is a small concern, and it has that Terrastal mechanic that says, this Pokemon doesn't take any damage from attacks while on the bench. I am praying that every single set, the Terrastal Pokemon that we receive have a different bit of text. If every Terrastal Pokemon has the same text that doesn't get damage on the bench, it's so much wasted potential. I will be so upset. There's no way that that's possible, right, guys? There's just no way that they're going to scorn us with what is possibly one of the most cool creative mechanics of the video game with just us not getting hit on the bench. Like, please don't do this to us. Regardless, we have 2 attacks that are both pretty expensive on the Gyarados, and we are losing Frostmoth, so this is going to be like Melanie as our acceleration and things like Frostlass, which could be an option. I think that's an accelerator. Anyway, we have Waterfall, 3 for 100, obviously not great. And for 5 energy, you get to deal 180. If your opponent's active already has damage counters on it, 180 more damage. It's obviously very, very good to deal this amount of damage. You're getting a huge knockout on something. You have to pepper it up somehow, and it's probably going to be like the Lucha, but the Lucha only pings stuff on the bench, so there is a lot of awkwardness here. Just getting to that 5 energy is going to be the big issue, really, for me, when you don't have the Moth to try and fix things. So trying to ramp this card, maybe some sort of Lost Box with Gates could help you get there, because you do have 2 colorless in your attack cost. The payoff is massive, though, don't get me wrong. This amount of damage is absolutely huge, so maybe there's a way for this to see some play, but overall it looks super expensive for what we're trying to get done. That being said, though, 300 hit points on a stage 1 Pokemon is great. The lightning weakness may be the biggest reason this doesn't see success, because you're not a tank if you're like just getting hit for weakness by one of the most popular decks in the game, if of course the lightning stuff does end up being powerful. We have an interesting Wiglet and Wug trio, no relation to Doug trio, of course. We have the Sea Tunneling for 3 colorless energy. You flip 3 coins, and for each hedge, you discard the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck, so I can already see this being all over the ladder. It has 90 hit points as well, so it's levelable, searchable, and rescue carrierable. It's just really getting that 3 energy attack costs each turn to make it happen. But boy, this is actually pretty scary, right? This is a lot of potential discard. It's a lot of coin flips, but it can be wild for the opponents if it starts going well early. So, yeah, actually a scary card. We have Dondozo, a massive basic. 160 hit points on a basic is not to be slept on at all. Has a 4 retreat cost, but it has the Vent Wrath attack, which is a 50 times multiplier for each Tatsugiri in your discard pile. This really reminds me of, like, Persimmon from the Sun and Moon base set, where we had like just a pretty well statted basic that could tempo out. And in an evolution format, having a Pokemon like this, definitely of this size, that can just sort of tempo out on stuff is actually pretty good. I think we lose a lot of discard synergy for our Tatsugiris because we lose Quick Ball and a few other things. Similar issues to how Lugia is going to try and struggle to get Arcups in the bin. But focusing a deck centered around binning Tatsugiris could potentially be a thing. And again, I'm just sort of enamored by the size of this Dondozo and the fact that it can do 200 pretty consistently and easily. We, of course, lose Twin Energy, so we only have DTE, so there may be other things that you have to do, other hoops you have to jump through to continually vent Wrath. But I think in all of these like convoluted Rare Candy Stage 2 decks that need all this time to get set up, just playing 4 Dondozo, 4 Tatsugiri, and like 8 energy or something seems really appealing, and you just tempo out stuff because you're 2-shotting everything pretty easily. You're tanky into like Lost Box, which would be the other like 1-price deck in format. I actually think Dondozo Tatsu is going to be a deck. I think it's a pretty okay 1-price deck in the game. Which could be replacing sort of the position of Lost Box or the position of Reggie's, because of course that loses a ton in rotation. So yeah, don't sleep on Dozo Tatsu. I think there's going to be other cool mechanics for this style of card for sure, because it's such a unique effect. But what they've given us so far, I'm pretty happy with, to be honest with you. I think it's looking pretty good. And of course, we have Hisuian Heavy Ball, so you don't have to worry too much about Tatsus finding their way into the prizes. We have easy ways out, and you could end up playing like double Hisuian or something. So yeah, I'm actually looking forward to just a very low to the ground, consistent Dozo Tatsu deck. Because unlike things like the recent Ditto Magikarp deck or whatever, with Magikarp Gyarados all finding their way into the discard pile, this is just like way lighter on slots, right? You just need to play 4 of these cards that are your triggers to increase your damage output. So should be a very easy deck to build. It has a low sort of ceiling in terms of damage, but it's so easy to just, you know, continually do that 2-shot game. Should be pretty solid, I think. We have some Killer Wattrel not doing too much. We have the Gardevoir line, which I think is one of the best things about this set. A 70 hit point Ralts shouldn't be slept on. It's just nice to be above 60, right? So you don't get completely trolled by Sableye if Lost Box is still around. I should mention the Curlier. It's a 90 hit point Pokemon, which is good for level ball. And we have the Psychic option, which does 60 and 20 more for each energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. For Psychic Colorless is expensive, right? But of course you can use Guardi EX to power this up in a turn. So it could be this random thing that just punishes like Mirror and whatnot if someone is going crazy, attaching a ton to like a Celebration Zacian or something. You can just Psychic finish them off. So this is not irrelevant text, but the main problem is it's up against Trade, so it probably isn't going to see the light of day, because obviously, or Refine, I should say, from the other Curliers in the format. We have a Guardi EX that has 310 hit points, is a Psychic type, of course. It is weak to Dark, does resist fighting, which is relevant, and it has the Psychic Embrace ability. As often as you like during a turn, you may attach a basic Psychic energy from your discard pile to one of your Psychic Pokemon. Then if you do, put 2 counters onto that Pokemon, and you can't use the ability if it would knock out the Pokemon. But yeah, very, very strong option here. The fact that it says as often as you like is absolutely absurd. So you can, as you cycle through throughout the game, you may end up, attaching 8, 9 energy all in a turn onto a Pokemon. You'll get it close to being knocked out, but not quite knocking it out, and that means that it doesn't really matter as long as you're ahead in a race or whatnot. It doesn't matter that you're allowing your opponent to punch you back really quickly because you're just continually knocking stuff out and staying ahead in a prize race. So the Gardevoir EX is looking really good, obviously because in part it's part of a gifted evolution line where we have Trade on Curlier, we have potential for Shining Arcana. Is it Shining Arcana? No, that's a set name. Anyway, the Gardevoir that can continually draw cards for free, the Gallade that can cherry pick supporter cards out of your deck. We have all sorts of ways that we can use this evolution line, and we only really need like 1 or 2 of the EX in our deck to be able to sort of make this Psychic deck function. I think there could be a few different directions of the Guardy deck. I think it could go alongside Shadow Rider very easily. I think it could go alongside just some basic like 1 prize and V attacking Pokemon. I do think the Celebration Zacian, that's a Psychic one, has a ton of potential here. So yeah, I think this Guardy is going to be very good for that style of deck where you have huge 1-hit KO potential. You are damaging your stuff in the process, but you should be able to race pretty effectively. And I think the one thing about this format that we're going into, we have a ton of different breakpoints of damage that you need to be able to reach, because now there are EXs in the game. So there's going to be, you want to hit 220 or so for V basics. You want to be able to hit 280 for V star Pokemon, and you want to be able to reach at times towards that 330 or so threshold, 320, 330. That would cover you for V maxes, and that would cover you for EX Pokemon. And the Gardevoir being able to power up all sorts of different attackers all in one turn gives it that flexibility to be really, really good. It also can deal 190 and heal special conditions, which isn't doing too much. But it's, again, a 2-hit KO option on a chunky Pokemon. Of course, you're probably damaging yourself a little bit in the process to actually launch this attack, but it could be a 2-hit KO style play as well if need be. So pretty good here. We have a Drifloon, which is just funny. If it had more hit points, it could possibly do something. It does 30x each damage counter on this guy, so it could be a combo with the Guardy. Someone's going to try and make a meme deck with that, right? Try and buff Drifloon's hit points to absurd amounts to try and make it happen. We have an interesting Dash Bun, which has the well-baked body. It can't be damaged or burnt by fire Pokemon. We've seen effects like this in the past with like Bronzong. There are times if there are pure fire decks in format where it can see play, but otherwise it's not doing too much. We have... what do we got? We've got a Lucario that has a revenge attack. If any of your fighting Pokemon were knocked out during their last turn, this attack does 120 more damage, so 150 for 1. Pretty efficient at finishing things off. And the fighting deck's going to be an interesting one. There could be like this double Lucario, where there's the EX and this Lucario all in one deck, and possibly the old Lucario from... well, I can't remember what set it is now, but the one that can accelerate to itself could potentially be interesting, where we just have one evolution line, again, with like a ton of different options that can go all into one package. So that's pretty interesting, I would say. We have a Crocodile, which can discard energy, attach to the opponent's active for just 1 attachment, but it's obviously coin flip based, and a 180 damage for 2. I mean, it's pretty good for Cube, possibly, but or GLC, just because of the size of this guy, but otherwise. Here's a Lucha that I've mentioned a couple of times. This is meant to be the sort of spiritual successor to Galarian Zigzagoon. I will say a couple things. Obviously, this only hits the bench. So, sorry, I should describe what this does. When this Pokemon is put from hand to bench, you may choose 2 of your opponent's bench and put 1 counter on each of them. So, yeah, the spiritual successor, like I said. A couple issues here, of course. We lose Scoop Up Net, and Zigzagoon oftentimes was good because of Scoop Up Net, because you could reuse its ability, or you could gain back your board space after using it. And of course, you could do more than 1 damage counter ping if you do multiple nets all in a turn, whereas the Lucha is pretty much that one and done deal, and also it's only to bench stuff. And very often you're Zig pinging the active to finish them off. So you have to either leave something heavily damaged in play that you've just hit and then you sort of like push it out of the way with a rope or whatever else, and then Lucha finish it off, and hope your opponent doesn't do any healing or picking up of Pokemon or whatever to change your sort of plan. Or you need to proactively put the 1 counter on while it's still a bench Pokemon setting up to be able to then, you know, reap the rewards of the damage counter placed. So yeah, I think this is a lot less flexible than Zig, obviously. So I think it's not going to do quite as well as that little Zigzagoon, unfortunately. We have Great Tusk EX, 250 hit points, basic Pokemon, pretty chunky. It is a fighting type. It has the Bedrock Breaker that does 40 and discards a Stadium in play for 1 energy, and it has the Giganto Tusk that does 250, and this Pokemon does 50 damage to itself. We do have Grants in format, we do have Belts, and we have the new When You're Behind tool, so there are ways that you can actually push this damage pretty well. And Koraidon is an accelerator for fighting. We also have the Gutsy Pickaxe, so this isn't that glamorous of a card, but it could just do the number, and sometimes just doing the number is good enough. Being weak to Psychic is a bit of a problem, but you're already damaging yourself anyway, so you're expecting to get knocked out a lot of the time. I'm not really seeing the fighting deck come together too well. I think it looks a little bit uglier than the Psychic and Lightning decks coming forward, but it kind of depends how good Lightning is in the first place to be this deck that can punish them. How easy it is for us to like grant and belt our way through the game as well to reach on other Pokemon. I've seen a lot of people just say this card is like bulk or bad, but I think it's probably one of the better things you could Koraidon onto, and it hits the number, which is pretty nice. The Koraidon has the Dinocry. Once during a turn, you may attach up to 2 fighting energy from your discard pile to your basic fighting Pokemon in any way you like, and then it does end your turn. So think of it like a Zacian using Intrepid Sword, but you have guaranteed energy in your discard pile. A 2 energy ramp is actually huge, and again, we have Trekking Shoes, we have Radiant Greninja, we have a few other bits and bobs here, so I think Koraidon is going to be the face of a low-to-the-ground fighting type deck, probably filled with cards like Great Tusk is like a 1 or 2 count just for that higher damage threshold, like a few copies of this guy, and just trying to be, again, fast, tempo-y, because 220, you know, coming in at turn 2 is pretty much the low bar that you need to set yourself these days. And it can just be a decent option. Maybe sitting behind things like Diancie could be important for a deck like this. But it could have a really nice turbo engine to get things rolling. And again, just being this deck that has a lot of space because it's mostly basics and just like energy and such, makes it in general more consistent than these stage 2 decks that are trying to have all these other like random thin lines and all this other stuff going on. And typically in early like formats like this, it's actually really important to just be the more consistent, simple deck, and it's things that I typically gravitate towards. So it's a little bit less glamorous and flashy, but I think Koraidon Great Tusk could actually just be a deck in the game because you're fast and you hit numbers. So yeah, relying on Gutsy Pickaxe is a little bit ugly though, because of course we lose Guru, so there may be some other ways we have to try and accelerate to our dudes. We have some other things going on. We have a really bad Toxicroak EX, which is a shame, because obviously we love our little Jimmy over here, the Krogunk. But the Stage 1 Toxicroak has 250 hit points as a Dark type, weak to fighting. It has the Nasty Plot, search your deck for up to 2 cards to put them into your hand, but it is using your attack. And the Toxic Ripper for Dark and 2 colors does 120, and your opponent's active is now poisoned, and you put 6 counters on instead of 1 between turns. Again, for 3 energy, this is really, really poor. Even with Dark Patch in format, it's no reason to really play this card. We have a King Gambit, which is a Stage 2 Dark type. 170 hit points. It has the Generalship. Generalship? Is that a word? Ability, as long as this Pokemon is in play, the attacks of your basic Pokemon do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. Reminds me of an old Empoleon, which had a very similar ability. Buffing 30 damage seems reasonable, but for a Stage 2, I don't think it's going to be all that worthwhile. It does change possibly some break points, but yeah, I don't foresee this seeing a huge amount of play, because it doesn't grant you too much value. We have a Reverb Stage 2, with 140 hit points. It has the Rumbling Engine. You must discard an energy from your hand in order to use this ability. Once during a turn, draw until you have 6 cards in hand. So it's like a nerf to a Beautifly that we already have in formats, which is so weird. I get the theme of the card having to spend an energy to be able to do its thing, but it's probably just a really bad effect, and its attack isn't great either. The knock away, look how many energy it is just to flip some coins. Terrible. Alright, we do have a Staraptor, which I thought was slightly worth noting. I mean, the spin away attack prevents all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from basics, so it reminds me of Obstagoon or even Max Balloon from Flying Peak. It's only damage being prevented right now. It's only 60 damage as well, so it's pretty slow, and it's a stage 2 on your end, but it is a colorless attacker, so it's maybe this random splashable card if we are worried about a basic attacking decks coming in. We have a couple great Lechonks, and we do have an Oink Alone EX. It has the Fragrance Fury for a colorless. You do 10 and 30 more for each of your opponent's benched Pokemon, so it can cap at 160. It has 260 hit points itself, and it has the Heavy Stomp for 3 colorless. You do 210, flip a coin if heads. This Pokemon can't attack during your next turn, so again, pretty vanilla, not setting the world alight, doesn't hit anything for weakness, all that bad stuff, no real reason to play it. Let's get on to the Violet cards. We have Scatterbug and Spooper, which can both evolve as they come into play, which is really nice for ramping into your evolutions. The Vivillon doesn't do too much, though. It just does some status shenanigans. We do have a Spydops EX that's a 260 hit point grass type stage 1. Has the Trap Territory ability. Your opponent's active Pokemon's retreat is 1 more, which then leads you into the Wire Hang, which for a grass colors does 90 and 30 more for each energy in your opponent's active Pokemon's retreat cost. So obvious, it's obvious what the idea here is, right? You get as many Spydops out as possible to buff your damage output. We are losing Galamine, which is kind of the thing that you would use with Leafeon VMAX, right? To increase your damage output. Possibly there's some sort of combination there where you're trying to play like a Leafeon Spydops style thing to get things rolling for you. But I think you'll probably have to set up too many evolutions that don't draw you cards just to be able to do a little bit more damage, and even then it's not all that appealing. I guess we have to wait and see what the retreat costs are of like the main Pokemon in format, because if Pokemon are already like 3 retreat cost Pokemon and then you're adding on the Trap Territories, maybe there's a reason to see play. But at the moment I'm not seeing it. It seems like too much work. But it could again be this sort of control-y card if you are looking for just the ability alone, trying to trap things and whatnot. There's always that as the backdoor option for a card like this. We have Toadscruel, which can allow you to choose an energy attached to your opponent's active and move it to one of their bench. It does deal damage though, so probably not great for a controlling deck. You want it to do as little damage as possible most of the time. We have a Scovillain, which isn't doing too much. Here's the Arcanine that we've seen previously. Again, 280 hit points on an EX, can't be hit on the bench, is weak to water. It has Raging Claws, 30 plus 10 more for each damage counter on this Pokemon. And it has the Bright Flame, 250 and discard 2 energy from this Pokemon. Again, really not bad. I think now that I've seen the Armor Rouge, I'm a little bit more optimistic about this card. I thought it was initially just probably not good enough, especially because you would have to continually base into it. But now that you could possibly base into other stuff and move energy to the active and just attach, it seems that little bit more reasonable, where 280 is actually just like a tanky number. But 250 again is a decent breakpoint, but probably needs some buffs in there. I don't want to be playing Armor Rouge and Rapidash in one deck. It sounds like too much work. So again, probably just a little bit below the bar from what I can tell so far. Just too many stage 1s having to be set up. We have a Slowbro, which is a throwback to Fossil Slowbro, and look at this artwork as well coming in. A really cool card, 100 hit points. Stage 1, and it has the strange behavior. As often as you like during your turn, you may move a damage counter from one of your Pokemon to this Pokemon, similar to the Life Shaker that we've seen recently on Gengar as well. Do well, just healing stuff. You could randomly do this in Guardy decks if you really wanted to heal off damage. If you're trying to like power up, maybe again I go back to Mewtwo v Union as a potential option, because you already have trade in your deck. You have easy ways to discard the Mewtwo. You could get 4 energies onto the Mewtwo, then you could Strange Behavior it all onto Slowbro, then suddenly you have a fully healed Mewtwo ready to swing. So yeah, not that bad. We don't have many ways to like pick up this card. Obviously we're losing Scoop Up Net, otherwise this could be a really cool way to just continually heal your stuff. But I actually think this is a combo that you shouldn't sleep on. Anytime you can move counters around, it can generate a lot of value for you. So I think this is one to sort of keep in mind for sure. So Titan's not doing too much. We do have the Magnazone EX. No real text on the Magnemite on Magneton. And I think that the card probably isn't doing enough in the format. I don't think there's enough cards that have a ton of energy attached to them to really make the most out of Energy Crush. There's a 50 multiplier for each energy attached. So it's mostly looking at like 2-hit KOing stuff, which isn't all that appealing. I think mostly it's just in the shadow of Amphoras, because it's got a better evolution line in the Flaffies. So, yeah, it's a shame for the Magnazone. 220 and dealing 30 to yourself as well sort of ruins the whole tank ability as the main selling point for this card. It could be wrong on this one, because 1 energy attacks that are mostly 2-shotting is pretty efficient. But you need your opponent to always be like attaching into your active. If you've gone like first, you have to end up using Pulse Launcher or whatever, and that can be setting the tempo, but not always like the best thing for you. You need to have some more abilities supporting this Magnazone, most likely. The Patriot can do a little bit of damage. If you're a fully lightning type deck, it could be a 1-prize attacker if really need be. 10 plus 20 more for each of your bench lightning Pokemon. It could be this random finishing off Mon, because again it's levelable, searchable, but I don't think it's all that worth it. We probably have better stuff like Regieleki still to use as 1-prize attacking Mons if you can power things up. So we have a Rotom getting back item cards, just 1. So it's half a junk hunt from back in the day, but there we go. We have a Toxicity that can choose 2 cards from your opponent's hand without looking and shuffle them into their deck, so possibly some hand-locking style synergy going on here. Maybe we're going to see some Zoro control decks where you have a number of stage 1s all going into one package and the Toxicity becomes a one-of. Could be a thing. We have a Paulmots, which is a 130 hit point stage 2 with a charge up. Once during a turn, you may search your deck for a lightning energy and attach it to this Pokemon, then shuffle your deck, and it does 230, discarding all energy from this Pokemon. We could try a Paulmot deck with Amphoras and the Flaffies to continually be like mostly a 1-prizer that can dish out the 230, but you are still a stage 2 and stage 1 deck, so it's probably too much going on overall to really get the job done, probably just too slow. This does have free retreat though, which is kind of nice. So there are some things going on here, but yeah, it's not the worst thing. Mirroride on one of the better cards from the set, certainly 220 hit points, and it has the Tandem Unit ability. Once during a turn, you may search your deck for up to 2 lightning Pokemon and put them onto your bench, then shuffle your deck, and it does Photon Blaster for lightning colorless, 220. During your next turn, this Pokemon can't attack. Didn't look too impressive until we saw the generator, but now that we do have the New Age Max Elixir, this is looking really good, because it can be this early game card that just gets you set up, but also could be that turn 2 tempo style attack that can really get you rolling. So yeah, definitely looking like a pretty decent option for us as my teams are starting to go off, because I have started early this morning just to look through all these scans, but it's almost time for work, so yeah. Let's keep going here. We have a Benetti EX, which is looking pretty good. I should mention the shop it. It has, for a Psych Energy, Wrapped in the Shadows, 10. Flip a coin if heads your opponent can't play item cards during their hand, from their hand during their next turn. Pretty big coin flip, but you can see the theme that we're going for here, because the Benetti EX is 250 hit points. It's a Psychic type. It has, for 1 Psychic, 30 damage, and your opponent can't play item cards from their hand during the next turn. We've very recently seen Vikavolt finally doing its thing. Vikavolt, of course, can be used on the first turn. The Benetti EX can't, so you're really relying on the shop it to flip coins to actually get the job done. But regardless, Item Lock is very powerful, and we have the Poltergeist that looks at your opponent's hand and does 60 for each trainer in your opponent's hand as well. It could punish some decks going expansive with their hand. I'm again thinking about the Gardevoir deck that's probably going to trade throughout the game. The only issue is, of course, they can trade away the items if they really want to. But the idea, of course, around this deck is to item lock and then punish them for not being able to get rid of their items here and there. Of course, as soon as you use a Poltergeist, then your opponent can get rid of all of their item cards, and then you're kind of stuck. So I think this card is glamorous and a nice throwback, but not that great. We are losing Vikavolt to rotation, so this is kind of the only item lock that we have. And I think if the shop it was a guaranteed item lock, we'd be having a different conversation, but the fact that this is a coin flip means that you're probably not going to be seeing too much play with this Benetti EX. We also don't really have as much good like damage around the board while you're doing this little 30 poke. We would kind of need some more help in that department as well. So I am quietly confident that this item lock won't be like completely ruining the game. And I think it's really important to be super cautious about item lock in a format where we're going into stage 2 decks, because as soon as item lock's good, then every stage 2 becomes unviable. So I think they've done well to not push it too far. We have Florgus, a 140 hit point psychic type, stage 2 that has the Bloom Garden ability. As long as this Pokemon is in play, your Pokemon have no weakness. It's not worth getting a stage 2 in play for that effect. We have a Clef Key that has the Prank Lock. As long as this Pokemon is your active, each player's basic Pokemon in play have no abilities other than Prank Lock. So it's similar to Empoleon, but it's not limited to rule boxes. So it can shut down all basic Pokemon, and that's going to be really annoying for Miraidon, Coridon, Radiant Greninja, Comfey, Luminion, lots of different things here. So this is actually a really annoying lock Pokemon to slow down things and sit behind. It has knockoff for 10, and you can discard a tool attached to the opponent's active. It's strange because this card doesn't help you get set up, but it is denying a lot of other engine decks. And if you are just going to be this sort of slow stage 2 deck, why not just shove a Clef Key in the active position? It could be something that can slow down opponents. So I can see this seeing play. Just again, it's levelable, searchable, which is massive in my eyes. So I think that's just a monster card next set or post rotation. So this seems like a good just one-off include that can really slow down lots of engines in the game. I don't think we're going to go the full 4 of. Possibly we do. It really depends how much space we have in decks. But I can see this being a one-of that you end up retreating into if you're in the right matchup sort of thing. So yeah. We have a couple Grievards. The first one looks at your opponent's hand, chooses a supporter, and puts it to the bottom of their deck. Again, more sort of hand-controlling stuff that we have going on here. And we have a Hound Stone, which is a stage 1 that can deal 80 and 10 more for each psychic Pokemon in your discard pile. It's got 140 hit points. Its attack cost is 2 psych energy. We have a... Now, what is it? It's a Lycanroc, a single-strike Lycanroc that has a very similar effect, right? But the issue with the Lycanroc was that it was only for single-strike Pokemon. The issue for this Hound Stone is that the damage output is just not good enough. 80 and 10 more for each Pokemon in the discard pile means you need to probably have 20 Pokemon in the discard pile to actually be doing the number that we want, and then your deck is going to be some crazy amalgamation. But yeah, I think possibly if we had like Scoop Up Net still in format, I could see this having a little bit of value because you could use a ton of Pokemon just to draw lots of cards, and then you could pick them all up and bin them all. But I think without the net, I think it's a way harder proposition to try and fill our deck with Pokemon these days. We have an Annihilate, which I think is really good for GLC. It does 70 for each prize card already taken by your opponent, so by the time they've taken 2 or 3 prizes, you're knocking everything out for 1 energy, and that's insane for fighting. Other than that, we move on. Screwteam, not doing too much. It can flip coins. It's similar to Radiant Jirachi for 2 dark energy, and we do have Dark Patch in the format, so I'm not going to be happy if we start seeing some purely coin flip decks in the game, but it could end up being the thing. We have Mabo Stiff. It's actually a stage 1 dark type with 130 hit points, and it has the Enraged Howling. Once during your turn, you may switch your opponent's active with one of their benched Pokemon, but your opponent chooses the one to bring active, so it's really just a repel style effect, half of an escape rope, push them to the bench. So, yeah, not too great there. Bombardier, not doing too much. Grabbing tools from the deck, not a big issue here. Too slow to be in any like tool drop style deck like Rotom or anything. Not doing too much. We have an Iron Treads EX, 220 hit point metal type basic. Triple laser for 3 colorless, does 30 to 3 of your opponent's Pokemon. And you also have the Cybernetic Wheel, it does 160, and switch this with one of your benched. It's pretty expensive to get this attack rolling, but in theory you could try and make a hit and run deck where you're throwing up Clef Keys, you're throwing up Diancies, you're throwing up stuff here and there. It's a powerful hit and run, and don't sleep on hit and run as a mechanic, but it's probably just not worth all the effort to get this going. We're losing a lot of metal support, right? We lose our Saucer, so there's no real way to get this generated quickly. So hit and run, gonna have to wait around for a little while longer, I think. But don't sleep on hit and run as an option. I think everyone has just written this off as trash, seeing that like, oh, triple laser's worse than, Or the same as a Registeel EX from like 10 years ago. This is never going to be a good card, but it's actually the second attack that makes me at least pluck my ears up a little bit. It is expensive, and of course there are ways around like a Diancie hit and run style deck, but you're representing 2 shots and throwing annoying walls potentially at people, which could end up being a thing at some points. Blissey not looking too great. We have a Squovit, which I thought was good, and then I had to reread the card. Once during a turn, you may shuffle your hand and return cards to the bottom of your deck without looking at them, then draw a card. I thought it was 1 for 1, but no, it's not 1 for 1. It's your whole hand for 1 card on top of the deck. That's not going to be worthwhile. What else do we have? We have a Mouse Hold, which does 70 for each mouse hold in play. Very thematic. You cap out at 280. You need the whole gang to be up, and you need to constantly recycle them. The issue is, of course, when one gets knocked out, then you need to bench a Tandem Mouse the next turn, so then you're limited to 210. So you're probably limited to 210 the entire game. Very cute, very cool. Little stage 1 deck, which should be pretty easy to continually chain. I don't think it's all that good though, because again, you have issues with prize cards. You have issues continually chaining this, even with good old. I'm really struggling for words. You can see it's early in the morning for me. My brain's still not working properly. Even with rescue carriers and levables and whatnot, it's still going to be a bit of a headache to continually chain these guys. And Lost Box will have a field day with this because the tandem mice are so small in hit points. And that's pretty much going to do all the Pokemon. There are a few more from some of the decks, though. We have the Sprigatito and Lucario EX deck. Most of these are just completely useless. Unfortunately, Meowscarada not doing too much here. And the Lucario EX we've seen previously. Now that we have seen the other Lucario, maybe there's more reason to look at this card, because you are trying to set up 2 shots, and then you have a revenge attacker, but that's pretty efficient for just 1 energy, but I still think it's probably below the bar. Not too much else to be said there. We have reprints, like I said, of Potions, E-Switch, Energy Search, a few other things here and there, Switch, Catcher, Judge reprint. We have a Youngster, which is essentially a Shauna reprint. Yeah, these are all just kind of reprint style cards. The Fuecoco, not looking too great either. The Skeledirge has amazing artwork, but the text is pretty terrible on it. This is where we have the Amphoras EX, which I've talked about a lot during the video. You have a 1 for 60, and you have Lightning Tail that does 140. You can discard 2 from this Pokemon if you do 100 more damage. It doesn't look all that great, but it's pretty appealing damage output. Even with DTE attached, you can be knocking out 2 prize basics, which is pretty nice. And the main thing is it evolves from Flaffy, right? So you can have this engine Pokemon going on, and then you end up with this 330 beast in the active position that your opponent has to get through. And it's really not easy for them to do that, where this card is going to be very, very solid. I can see it going alongside Mirroride pretty easily as just being a deck in the game. So yeah. And then we end up with more reprints. The Quaxquavel is actually kind of the most interesting stage 2 of them all. 170 hit points that has the Energy Carnival ability. Once during a turn, you may attach a basic energy from your hand to one of your Pokemon. Not too bad, you know? Just anywhere. It is from hand. It's any type of energy, though, so it's very flexible. I think it's, again, probably too slow for a Stage 2 Pokemon, because it all is from hand acceleration, but it's at least got some text that you have to look at, unlike the other Stage 2s, unfortunately for them. And then we have the Mimikyu EX, which does 30x the amount of energy attached to both active Pokemon. You can try and damage this Mimikyu up the wazoo with your Guardi EX, so this could go alongside Zacian. I think Zacian's probably just better, or Zacian is just better than this card, but again, it depends. If there are other energy style flood decks, you could end up bursting through them a little bit easier than Zacian. This does have a little hit and run attack as well, but not too important. And yeah, more reprints, energy retrieval and whatnot to really round things out. So yeah, that is the Scarlet and Violet EX stuff. Honestly, it doesn't feel like there's too much power creep going on. I would say that there's probably going to be 2 or 3 big archetypes coming out from the set. There's going to be Amphoras EX Flaffy like Mirroride. There's likely going to be a basic fighting deck, even though it doesn't look all that appealing. There's going to be definitely some Guardi EX. I think Guardi EX is like the biggest card from this set, definitely, in terms of likely going to be the front runner for possibly new strongest deck in the game, but it's definitely going to be among the top decks in the format. I think those are the 3 real selling points, and then that we have some like probably too much work style cards outside of that, like possibly some fire stuff with Arcanine. I'm not too impressed by the Gyarados. It's too expensive to really get going. But yeah, some interesting pieces here and there, and it's all just giving us more options. Some really interesting evolutions going on that have some pretty interesting abilities. I'm low-key interested in the Dondozo Tatsu, just very simple, basic attacking deck that just sets the tempo and is pretty honest and forces like actual damage output from everyone the whole game because of its hit points. So let me know your thoughts on Scarvi EX. I spent most of the time just talking about Standard, even though I said I was going to talk about Cube and GLC, but I just can't help myself and think about how the Standard format's going to be looking. So apologies for that, but we're going to have plenty more content on Scarlet and Violet as we get closer to the time. Don't worry about a thing. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.